Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue our journey watching Paul and Karine on 90 Day Fiancé. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and a lot of you asked that we make a t-shirt and other merch, mugs and whatnot, stickers, that have this on it, because apparently I say this all the time. So let's see if anything of interest comes out of my face.
If Karine's father doesn't approve of what he finds out, it'll be the end of our relationship.
Então ele tá aqui para falar alguma coisa para vocês sobre o histórico criminal dele e poder falar o que tá acontecendo.
To be honest?
Tá. O Paulo está sendo acusado de incêndio criminoso e também de fraudar seguro.
Okay, so that's another charge that we haven't heard any information about, insurance fraud. I wonder if we'll get the details on that.
Além disso, ele também tem algumas reclamações com uma ordem restritiva, preventiva de uma ex-namorada dele.
No Brasil, o apoio da família é fundamental para o casamento. Meu pai é ex-policial e isso pode pegar mal.
I'm open to answer any questions that you all have for me.
So I'm worried about Paul in this instance because the last time he came clean about this, last season with Karine, he seemingly had a downward spiral of shame and defectiveness schema. You know, watch those past episodes. And when he has that experience, at least visibly, he has seemingly a lot of distress and a lot of self-destructive behavior. So let's hope that that doesn't happen again.
Esse processo está em andamento?
Is it currently a process? No, it's being checked.
Everything's done. This happened 2008, so this is way back.
Okay, 2008, a little bit more detail.
I do regret that entire situation of my life, dealing with the wrong people, put in that spiral of situations. I wish I could go back and I could change those things, but I can't.
So I don't know if they're editing it, but he has these rote statements that he says. I was a downward spiral. I regret I fell in with the wrong crowd, and I'm never going to do it again, but no details. I'm guessing that he's ashamed of the details. I don't know. He's worried about misinterpretation. I don't know. I just have to say, as a viewer, not as a therapist, just as a curious person watching the show, I'm very curious as to what exactly happened. Maybe we'll never find out.
Entendi a parte de namoro. Eu queria assim pouco que me explicasse mais para eu entender o que houve, por que aconteceu.
So that's great. So she's asking the question that I would want to ask. I want to ask just as a viewer.
She's asking if you ever hurt someone, especially a woman.
No. I've never laid hands on a woman or an animal or anything in my life. Even in self-defense, the message that I sent to her, nothing threatening, never hit her, never pushed her, nothing like that.
Okay, so it seems credible what he's saying. Of course, we just have to take his word for it. But that's a question that I was having as well. There was a restraining order or a protection order going both ways. Was there violence? He's claiming no. So we have that data point.
Karine, minha filha, o que você acha disso tudo?
Eu acho, tem momentos de brigas, mas nunca ele levantou a mão pra mim e ele é muito calmo. E espero que vocês possam, se não confiam, dar voto de confiança.
Okay, I think this conversation is going really well. The parents have good questions. They're, give us the circumstances. How do we know you're not going to hurt her? And then the father has a really great question. Karine, my daughter, how do you feel about this? Are you worried that he's going to hurt you? Because you know him better than we do. And Karine says, no, he's never threatened me. He's never intimidated me. He's never hit me. He's never threatened anything like that. And so I'm not worried about him hurting me physically. And that doesn't necessarily mean he won't, but it is a good gauge of the future. So, I feel like this conversation is very functional. Just as a viewer, I wish the parents would grill him more and say, look, walk us through every step that happened. When you talk about falling in with the wrong crowd, what do you mean? Why did you set your own place on fire? Insurance fraud, what's up with that? I'd be curious about those details because I'm just a viewer watching the show.
She's saying that you're a really calm person, that you never even thought of committing domestic violence against her, and then saying that she's trusting you.
Tem ninguém direito, ninguém certo nessa vida. A gente tem que passar por altos e baixos. Continuar a vida, uma vida nova, né? Sem processo e sem...
He's saying that we're all humans and some people commit mistakes, and he understands you. He just wishes that all of these criminal things are over.
Ricardo.
So hopefully for Paul, this is a corrective experience for him, that he can bolster the notion that he is not a terrible human being, that he deserves a good life, and that he's not defective at his core, which he seems to exhibit that schema where he believes that at his core he is a defective, broken human being. I don't know that. I'd have to talk with him. But he seems to exhibit that. And the problems that stem from that assumption that he's worthless and defective cause problems in his life for him and Karine. So hopefully this will actually counter that for him, heal that for him, so that he doesn't react so strongly when there are indications of defectiveness from him.
Because we can finally move forward with our wedding plans in Brazil.
Eu tô muito animada pra me casar. Paul não é perfeito, mas eu amo ele.
I love you.
I love you too.
So in a previous episode, I was hypothesizing or just observing that the range of his emotional expression seems to be limited and seems to be stunted in some ways. Like he is trying to appear as if he has an emotion instead of spontaneously having the emotion. And the contrast between him and Karine right there is interesting. Now, people on the internet will say, oh, lack of emotional expression. He must be a sadistic psychopath, an antisocial, and a sociopath. The internet likes to say sociopath. We tend to use the word psychopath. We can use the word sociopath, but it's not defined very well. And so you always have to say what sort of sociopath you're talking about. But anyway, the point is that on the internet, they say, oh, lack of emotional expression, psychopath. And I don't know if that was what people are saying about him. The other thing they'll say, oh, autism spectrum, which is possible. But there are lots of different reasons, that much more common reasons as to why you would have stunted emotional expression. You're nervous, you don't trust other people, you were abused growing up for expressing your emotions. So I would be more curious about those hypotheses than autism or psychopathy. We don't see any other evidence of psychopathy in him. Now, we do have a criminal past, and there's a number of crimes that he was accused of and seemingly convicted of: arson, insurance fraud, and breaking a restraining order. And so that does constitute potential psychopathy. But it sounds like it was a period of his life where things were really bad, and he has not exhibited that kind of behavior outside of that, chapter. So who knows? But anyway, my point is that let's rewatch this again, and then I'll talk about what I'm thinking might be the case. So watch his emotional reactivity. I think, when you have an emotion and then you have a spontaneous physical manifestation of your emotion, contrast that with Karine's reactivity in that moment. Let's watch it.
Ricardo.
I am blown away. This is a huge relief because we can finally move forward with our wedding plans in Brazil.
Eu tô muito animada pra me casar. Paul não é perfeito, mas eu amo ele.
I love you.
I love you too.
So you see with Karine, it's more from the heart, the laughter, the expression of love. For him, it seems stilted in some way. There's some internal resistance or something that's happening. So typically what that is a result of is early childhood mistreatment that causes the child to learn to be very careful about what they express. And it's a hard habit to break. Once you establish that at the age of 2, 3, 4 years old, as an adult, it's hard to allow yourself to be spontaneously emotional. So that's one. The other possibility is that he actually has a hard time connecting with what he wants. And so he doesn't have spontaneous emotional reactivity that he's aware of. But underneath, there is spontaneous emotional reactivity. It just doesn't have a chance to get out because he's not really aware of what's happening. He's anxious, so that could actually hinder emotional expression. If you're terrified, you tend to disallow the ability to be spontaneous. So those are hypotheses that I would pursue, not necessarily autism or psychopathy, although those things could be hypotheses you could pursue as well. But I don't see any other evidence along those lines. I mean, autism spectrum, I will say, is a difficult thing to observe from afar. A lot of people claim that they can be like, oh, that person looks autism spectrum. And maybe some people have an ability there, but I find that people throw that diagnosis around willy-nilly, and it's hard, if someone is mildly autistic, usually you have to talk with them, because people who are mildly autistic, they learn, whether they know it or not that they're doing this, they learn to fit in. They learn to pass as someone who doesn't have autism. And they will appear like nothing is different about them. But when you ask them about their experience, they will have very common experiences. And listen to my episode on autism recently. It was, 6 months ago. I can't remember the title of it, but I talked with someone who has mild autism, and she really explained how it is for them and how that might manifest in, behavior, and how much suffering results from people just not understanding what autism is and not understanding where they come from. Like, just one myth that she debunked that I might as well debunk here is that there's this notion in society and on the internet that people with autism don't have empathy. That is utterly scientifically, empirically ridiculous. Autistic people have empathy. Now, the more severe your autism is, it's possible that it's hard for you to exhibit the empathy because you might not have a good sense of what's going on with other people, meaning that you'll hear people say lack of the ability to notice social cues, and that's a real thing for people on autism. And if you can't read other people's minds, if you can't read their emotional state, then you can't have empathy for their emotional state. And so that's why sometimes people will think autistic people don't have empathy, but they do. They have just as much empathy as anyone else. One could argue they have more empathy because they're highly attuned to certain things, and they can be overwhelmed sometimes with their empathy, and they turn it off because it's just too much information of someone else's emotional state. So, I just want to clear that up. Anyway, let's continue watching.
Vamos viver o presente, porque o futuro só pertence a Deus, né? Então,
She hopes this all gets left behind, and
it's a nice statement or proverb. Let's live in the present because the future belongs to God. It's a nice way of looking at the world.
it's just the future.
It's all left behind, and I'm here with Karine.
De início eu não confiava no povo. A conversa foi muito aproveitoso e eles estando felizes, estão também.
eu espero que nada de ruim aconteça com ela, que por machucar essa Karine, eu como mãe me revoltaria.
So you kind of see it where often he has like resting, I'm trying to think, like resting what face? He has resting blank face. Maybe that would be the way that, this is just my, comment below, let me know what you think about this, because I'm just one observer. Am I making any sense? He has resting blank face where it's just kind of, his face is just kind of dead. And then every once in a while he'll go, but you don't see the smile in his eyes. I think he's trying to communicate something, but it comes off as a little disjointed. Now, again, I'm not saying he's a psychopath. I don't see any evidence of that. There's a lot of other reasons why people would do that. Like I said, early childhood trauma regarding expressiveness and learning to habitually just turn off that access. It's similar to young people who, particularly boys, who learn that crying is something that they shouldn't do. that if they want to be a good person, they have to learn how to not cry. And they will transform their tears into anger. I actually did this when I was young. And then as an adult, you can't cry. When I was an adult, I couldn't cry. It was like impossible for me to cry. I've subsequently learned how to re-engage with my spontaneous cry response, and now I cry all the time. But there was a time when I couldn't. So with regards to that one emotion, I could not exhibit spontaneous sadness physically. And people might have looked at me and said that I had no feelings, that I didn't have any empathy because I didn't cry ever. I might have even thought that about myself. But that wasn't the case. I had empathy, and I do have empathy. At the time, I had sadness. I had reasons to cry. But because I had essentially conditioned myself to not have that autonomic response, that bodily response, I just never cried. And so for some people, they'll turn off all of their emotional expression: laughter, joy, interest, disgust, love, and they'll just have resting blank face. It doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that they learned long ago they had to turn that off. That would be my guess about him. We haven't heard anything about his childhood. He said that he's experienced hostility his entire life. That sort of points in the direction of early abuse in life, but not a slam dunk by any means. So I guess maybe we'll find out, or maybe we won't. But let's continue watching. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.